goal is to help you live with more purpose, love with more passion, and lead an overcoming life. Well, today on Healing Rain, I have author and speaker, podcaster Melanie Redd, and I'm thankful for the project that she's just completed on rest. But before we get that, I want to encourage you to stop by my website, SueDetweiler.com, and download 5 Steps of Grace, a journey guide to freedom. Well, today on Healing Rain, we have Melanie Redd, and welcome on Healing Rain.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here with you.
Oh, well, I love what God's doing in your life. And can you tell us, where did your healing journey begin?
Well, I would say my healing journey began when I came to know Christ personally. Yeah. I was 11. I was in a service at my church, and a man was sharing his testimony. And he just real simply said that he didn't know if he died, he'd go to heaven. And that's when he came into a personal relationship with Jesus. And it was in that moment, even though I've been in the church since I was 6 weeks old, I thought, I know about him, but I don't know him. And so I came to know him as I guess I was in the 6th grade. And that's when I began my walk with him. And now, all these years later, I'm still walking with him. But that's where he began the journey.
I agree with that. I was 12 years old too when I came to know the Lord. And that heartfelt transformation that can completely change the trajectory of your life. I'm so thankful. For me, it was in Bible school, and I'm so grateful that God saved me. And there's been a real journey of healing this year too for you, right? You're showing me ahead of time that you had a word for this year.
I did it's crazy, but my word for this year was heal. And my verse
Hold
is,
up your plaque. Yes, I love it. It's beautiful.
It's backwards, but I'll show you. Every
Oh,
year
yeah.
I have them printed, and then I put them on my wall so I can see it every day. But I have to share my verse with you. This is Psalm 30:11. And it says this: then he broke through and transformed all my wailing into a whirling dance of ecstatic praise. He has torn the veil and lifted from me the sad heaviness of mourning. He wrapped me in the glory garments of gladness. And I would say
Beautiful.
what God gave me as I was praying about this year, honestly, I have been busy. I tell people, while they were watching Netflix during COVID, I wrote 9 books.
No.
Several were ghostwriting books. That means I just write for someone who maybe has recorded them or whatever. And I also my husband and I went on a big diet, and I lost 30 pounds. And so I was busy during COVID. And as I came into December, I felt like God said, slow down. I mean, it is time to slow down, and let's focus on some things in your life. And that's the word he gave me. And it was like he said, I want to take you on a journey where we heal and restore some relationships and some family issues and some things in your life. So slow down. I'm going to work on you this year. And he has. Yes.
How old are your children, Melanie?
My children are 29 and 27. And they actually came to live with us again during COVID. And so my daughter, we just moved her out last weekend, and my son is still here working full time. But anyway, we were all back together for a couple of years. And so it's been, the quiver's been very full the last few years. Yes.
God did that for us one year. I mean, our kids had already grown when I had a vision of Texas surrounded in flames. And so we moved from Nashville, where we'd pastored for 28 years, and we left our adult children. But most of them followed us, and we ended up with everyone, and I have 6 children, everyone in the home, including one son-in-law and one baby that was conceived, in the
Wow.
midst of us,
Yeah.
and I call it a year of laughter,
Yeah.
because there's something joyous when our kids come home again.
You're right. It's interesting because I had one of my mentors is an older lady whose kids are grown and married with grandchildren. But she told me, she said, sometimes they come home and you get just a little moment or two with them. And she said, they may never come back, but if they're there, enjoy every moment. And we have. It has been so much fun to have them back as young adults and to be able to just have
Mhm.
good conversations and to stay up late watching movies and to play games. We've taken long walks. I just see how God has used the time. It's been really sweet.
Oh, I love it. What my kids are in the process of they're having babies, the oldest three. So we have 8 grandchildren, all under 5.
Wow.
And so they still come, but they're bringing, all their kids. So this weekend they were over and overnight and with the kids. And, those conversations when you've got a 5-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a 2-year-old, I just love it when we can just talk.
Yeah.
Because in between the sippy cups and the potty and everything else that's needed.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great.
Well, I love that your project this year is on rest. And
Yes.
talk about how the Lord has spoken to you about rest, which I find incredibly healing.
Well, I'll tell you, it's interesting. I had written several devotions for teen girls, and I had been working with a company, and one of them in particular had done very well. And a lady saw that had started a publishing company. She's actually just an hour from me. I'm in the Memphis area, and she's in Nesbit, Mississippi, little bitty town. And she said, I want you to write a devotional for young adult women and for college girls about anxiety and fear and depression. And so that's kind of how we started. We met in, I think it was January of 2021. Everybody was still, there were still masks. Like you couldn't even go to most restaurants. And so we met in a coffee shop in the Memphis area, and we began to talk. And she just sort of laid out her vision. She said, people are so anxious. They're so afraid and they're so nervous. And she said, and
Mhm.
on top of that, add COVID and the crazy of our world. And she said, it's just everything's heightened.
Mhm.
And so that was kind of how the project began. And so as I began to pray, I had more time than I'd ever had on a book. Like I told you, I've been writing a lot of books. And so this was last
Mhm.
spring and summer. And as I began to walk, I walk every morning. I walked and I was like, what am I going to write? I can't just every day say, don't worry, don't be afraid. I thought, that's not, it was 3 months worth, 90 days. And so as I began to pray, I felt like God gave me the idea to every day point back to one of his traits or his names or a quality about God, mostly from the Old Testament. And so, for example, when a girl feels like she's all alone, then we talk about the God who never leaves you. When she feels unseen,
Mhm.
I shared the story of Hagar and how he's the God who sees me. When she feels like no one is on her side, he's the God who's on your side. And so that's what the book is about. It's about rest, but it's about finding rest in a God who adores you. And that's kind of the essence of the project.
Oh, I love it. Finding rest in a God who adores you.
Yeah.
A couple of years ago, the Lord said to me, I want you to clear your schedule, cancel everything. And he was speaking to me about rest, and he gave me an acronym, REST. And for that, it was revive, expectancy, surrender, and trust.
That's good.
And it's been such a sweet acronym. I love it when in prayer he gives you something and it's from heaven, to you. But I love how rest is so restorative and it does revive something in us, that expectancy. But also when you rest, there's a surrender and trust to it in the fact. And, when I think about rest, one thing I love about it is that, the Sabbath that God made,
Yeah.
the 6th day, we were made, and then the 7th day, God rested. So, if you think about human beings, our first day on earth was rest.
Yeah.
And I love the fact that the rest of God it doesn't depend on us getting all of our work done.
Yeah.
We rest in what He's done.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good word. And, I think one of the points that we've done with this devotional. Now, we started out doing it for 20 somethings, but my
Right.
friends who are 30 somethings and 40 somethings said that they were young women at heart. And so they've been doing the devotional too. But one of the goals is to remind women, especially, that we need time every day to rest in his presence, even if it's just for a few minutes. I mean, I did it earlier today. It was interesting. I think I had shared with you, we tried to do this interview 2 other times. We've had all kinds of kind of tragedy and challenge in our family. And today we moved my mother from, after being in the hospital for a month, she's now going to skilled nursing care. And it's just been a crazy last few weeks. And as I came home and I just had a moment, I just sat down in my closet by myself and just looked up to heaven and said, I need you. And it was something about a few sweet moments of quiet in God's presence that's just restorative and healing. And it's like you go in with an empty cup and he fills you back up from time in his presence. So I like to encourage people, we can rest every day. We can rest in quiet moments in between all the crazy.
Yeah. What has that been like for you? Because I remember one of our interviews, something happened with your mom. She's 84, 85. So talk about that. What's that been like for you?
Well, I'll tell you, it's been a crazy, when God gave me the word heal, I had no idea that there was going to be so much sickness. I have a sweet sister-in-law that went to be with the Lord just 2 months ago. And I think
Wow.
that was the first time we were supposed to talk.
Wow.
And then a month ago, my mother fell. They think she fainted. She hit her head, got a brain bleed, which had to be
Wow.
operated on. She has a huge scar across her head. And in her recovery, they had gotten her to rehab. She was doing well. She had a stroke. And so
Wow.
she now can't walk. She can't stand. She can't use her hands. And she's got to go through months of rehab. And she's 82. And she and my dad have been independent. And then last Friday, he found out he's got Parkinson's. And so my parents,
Wow. You have had a year.
yeah, I know. I'm like, Lord, you gave me the word heal. I had no idea, Sue, that this was going to be the year there would
Mhm.
be so much sickness. And I tell people my parents were independent, living on their own, doing great. He's 85, she's 82, but they were doing whatever they wanted to do. And they both
Mhm.
now, it's going to be a big change for both of them and for us. I'm the only child in town, and so it's busy, but I also see God's healing. I won't go into
Mhm.
details, but I see some healing taking place in our family.
Yeah.
God uses these things, doesn't he,
Mhm.
in unexpected ways. So,
Yeah. Yeah, I went through a healing challenge a couple years ago, and someone that's walked with me, one of my healing team people, medical professional. I told her that I was going to write a book on healing, which I just handed in.
oh, wow.
But anyway, she said, "You mean you're writing a book about suffering?" And I just
Oh,
laughed
yeah.
and laughed because, that's the truth. You don't call a book suffering.
Mhm.
But really, when God does a work of healing in your life, it has to do with, often there's been suffering that you've experienced, or things that you've endured, or things that have helped you to fellowship with Him in the suffering, you know. And that's the truth of our lives. There's something about this earth that's a part of it. It's part of how we get to know him. We know in heaven he'll wipe away every tear, and we get glorious heavenly bodies, which I can't wait for.
Yes.
Uh,
Yes.
but in the meantime, there's stuff that we deal with.
Yeah, and I read a quote. I couldn't tell you who this quote is from, but they said God will never use anyone greatly until He allows them to go through deep, deep waters and great suffering. And it does seem like, I don't know if you found this, but it seems like God gets my attention the most when life is hard. I mean, when life is good, I can get busy and focused on other things. And I'm praising Him, but boy, you start taking all the props out and cause it, people start getting sick and things start happening. I am on my face. I never pray like I do when life is hard. And maybe we're all like that. I do think that's God uses suffering to get our attention often.
Yeah, I think it gets our attention, but it also he gives us an opportunity for our character to be conformed to his image. I mean, I'm quoting from Philippians 3, that we fellowship with this suffering. It's talking about getting to know Christ and fellowshipping with him, but also it's how we're conformed to his image, and the fact that he lived on this earth and he suffered, but then he also was raised from the dead. It's part of how we understand the power of resurrection is that we go through things that in many ways we're dying to ourselves or we're dying to things. And though it's painful, it's difficult.
Yeah. But I also think I think you're right. And I do think we get to know him in a sweeter, deeper way each time we go through some trial. I don't think I've called on him quite the same or relied on him as much in the last 2 months as I have in a long time. And so there is something kind of refreshing and cleansing and powerful about when life is painful. It's like what is the quote? He shouts in our pain. And so I hear him real clearly when life is hard. And maybe that's part of the healing process. Maybe for some of us, especially, it takes a little louder, little more challenging opportunities before God can do that deep, deep work in us.
Yeah. Yeah. And he doesn't bring bad in the world. He doesn't create, hardships. And yet he uses everything for his glory. And there's something about it that's, how he experienced, our world. I really am looking forward to heaven, though.
Me too, girl.
I really am. Yes. I mean, there's such and that is the hope, the final healing really is heaven. Yeah. It really is that restoration of all things that happens. Yes. Yeah. So I want to ask you a question about this. When you're thinking about healing, because your big word this year is heal.
Yeah.
How does body, mind, soul, spirit, how does that interact? God's healing in our life?
Oh, that's a great question. I think it affects all parts of our lives. When he's dealing with us, sometimes when he's dealing with deep emotions or something spiritually, there are moments where I feel it physically. It's hard to explain, but you can feel emotional pain. You can feel loss in every way. But it does seem like when he does a deep work in my life, it affects all parts. And so it affects your sleep, it affects your appetite, it affects your energy levels. So I can see how when God's at work, it affects our whole person. And he doesn't just work on the spirit, he works on the body and the soul.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. I found it interesting that there are some diseases that doctors and nurses point to, that they're connected with the heart healing that's needed or the mental. It's every part of it. And I think when he does a healing work, he really does a healing from the inside out. He works it in his way.
Well, and it's like when he restores you or he heals something in your life, it gives you this energy and this excitement, and it affects you're right, from the inside out. This joy and this hope comes in after he's healed you or restored or renewed or just done a great work in your life, and it affects you in every way. So I've seen that many times where God healed something in my deepest recesses of my being, and it affected me to from the top of my head to the bottom of my feet.
That's true. Yeah. And it makes me a better person, I think. There's something about when compassion's deeply in your heart and you think about the miracles that Jesus did, 5 of them were motivated by a deep felt compassion that he had for the people that were going through it. And I think that's a big deal, is compassion is built in our hearts, that we're able to relate to the things that others are going through the things that we've experienced.
Absolutely. Is it Second Corinthians 1 where it talks about we go through and what we go through, God will turn and use to help us to help others. And my
The
scripture,
comfort that
yeah,
we've received, we use to comfort others.
yes.
And so count it all joy. That's
Yes.
jumping to James, when
Yes.
you go
Yes.
through various trials and, to count it all joy is something that is an act of our will and a belief that he is the joy of our life and that his joy gives us that strength.
Yeah. And I've seen that so often because I know you're a teacher and a speaker, and I'm a new podcaster. I just started in January, but I've found when I share personal struggles or something I've been through or something God's done in my life, people can relate. It's like when you admit, I really had to work through this, or God needed to work in me, or, he needed to do something in this area of my life. People go, me too. And it's amazing how God can use the things that we go through. I believe he'll use what I'm dealing with my family to be able to help me have compassion for the next person that goes through something like this. It helps me to see the challenge of being in a hospital for a long period of time. It makes me appreciate doctors and nurses and hospital staff. I mean, it really, God can use whatever we go through to build in us a certain compassion and empathy that we didn't have before. And
Yeah.
so I love how he does that. Yes.
Yeah. Well, Melanie, as we close today and we've been talking about healing, we've been talking about rest, what would be something that you would want the Healing Rain listener just to know, that would help them on their own healing journey?
Absolutely. That's such a good question. One of my favorite things, now I like things to be simple. And so one of my favorite philosophers is the cartoon character Snoopy. And he's very deep, but he has one cartoon where he says, keep looking up. That's the secret of life. And one of the things I love to do is constantly during the day, remind myself to look up, to fix my eyes on Jesus. He's the author and perfecter of my faith, to fix my focus on him over and over and over all day long. I will tell you, there's something about when we look up to heaven and realize there's a God in control of all things, it brings a certain peace and it brings a certain calm. We can be still and know that he is God, but we have to look up. And so I just remind people all the time, keep looking up. That's the secret of life. It's not inside of me. It's not around me. It's above me. He is my secret of life.
I love that. And it makes me think of, I pray for a lot of people all through my life. I've prayed for people and for their healing and have seen miracles. But I find myself when I'm dealing with like a difficult case or something that, God needs to move. And I find myself looking up. And part of what happens when I do that is I'm taking the care and I'm casting it on him, because he's the healer. He's the one
Absolutely.
that can heal hearts and he heals bodies and he heals marriages. And, but that's a really good perspective. And it's interesting because I do find myself doing that.
Well, and
Just,
there's something about
yeah,
the practice of it, even simply forcing your eyes and your
yeah,
posture towards
yeah,
heaven, it reminds you he is there. And all of
yeah,
this is temporary, but we have a God who's completely in control. He's King of
yeah.
Kings and Lord of Lords, and we got to keep looking to him.
Hmm. Many, many years I oversaw a lot of things in ministry. And so I would have these meetings back to back, people waiting and coming in. And my little secret was I would go to the restroom in between meetings. And the main thing I was doing is I was going, God, help. What
Right.
do you need? What does this person need? Because if we do turn our eyes to look up, but also our ears to just really listen, because he's the one that has the answers. He's the healer. He's the one that restores hope. And that focus on him makes all the difference.
It does. Even before we talked today, I just went in the closet and once again said, I need you. And sometimes there's no words. Well, I know, when you're tired, but I want him all the time. I want the sensitivity to his spirit. I want to be aware. I want to be quiet before him so that he can fill me back up so that I have something to give. And so that's just one of Snoopy, I can remember it. Keep looking up. That's the secret of life. So that's one of my favorite things to share because it's just so easy to look everywhere else.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Well, thank you, Melanie, for being on Healing Rain. And Healing Rain listener, I would just say to you, let that be an encouragement today. Look up, look into his eyes, rest your head upon his chest, find a sense of rest in him. You can depend on him. He's completely trustworthy.
Amen.